I want to apologize, guys. My asthma seems to be acting up today, and then I ran, which I shouldn't have done, so I'm having trouble breathing. But there you go. Nous reprenons la réunion numéro.
Welcome to meeting number 112 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, which was suspended on February 27th. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
I'm going to go through the usual stuff about the fact that the public health authorities do not mandate a mask, but please wear one because they're excellent tools to prevent you from getting respiratory diseases and from giving it to others. Now, again, remind you that you're not allowed to take headshots or shots of any kind of the meeting. You can get the proceedings on the House of Commons website. And reminding you about the audio and the sensitivity of audio, and if you have any devices, to keep them as far away as possible from the mics when you're speaking, and to also keep your stuff as far away as possible from your next door neighbor's mics to make it happen. So now, we're resuming where we left off because the meeting had been suspended. So we basically have on the floor a motion from Ms. Thomas. And we're going to resume debate on the motion. But before we do, at the last meeting, if you recall, we decided not to go forward until we had gotten some information about the motion in itself, who gave what to whom, etc., and whether this motion was in order. And so I had asked the analysts to check out the information, and they did. And from what they told me, I'm going to have to rule this motion inadmissible, mainly because we're asking the Minister of Heritage in this motion to come and speak to giving money to a conference that was a racist conference. Actually, while the Department of Canadian Heritage did give money to SSHRC, they gave money specifically and only in the last 2 years, and the year mentioned, for sport activities and relating to research on sport. So they did not and they cannot answer questions on this particular fund because they were not responsible for it. Another department did it, and one may want to consider if one can deal with that department in an admissible motion. But I'm going to have to rule this motion inadmissible, because while the actual issue of racism falls under the mandate of the committee, under the mandate of this committee, the actual grant falls under the mandate of the Committee on Industry and Technology. The main intent of the motion focuses on this study, and it's one of the core responsibilities under the Department of Heritage's framework. But at the same time, this actual grant was not given for this conference by the Department of Canadian Heritage. And I did not research it myself, just in case you were wondering about credibility of it. I had asked my analysts to do this, and they reported back to me on this issue. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. And then Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I would highlight that I actually have a copy of what is posted on the government's website, and it shows that, in fact, nearly $25,000 was given to this conference. So it's not true that it just goes towards sport organizations. It's just not true based on the document that I have in front of me. I would challenge the chair's ruling.
Right, go ahead. I'm telling you that I did not research this and come up with this. The analysts, who are very impartial and have always done good work for us, told us that no money was diverted for anything other than sport, and that the grant actually came from another department for SSHRC, specifically for this particular conference. And by the way, I should tell you that SSHRC, which is an arm's length research body, is not part of, what they do does not have anything to do with departments. The money is given and they make a decision about what they're going to research. So I just want to put that on the table with regard to research bodies, which are not parts of department, but are actually standalone research bodies that get grants for doing work, and they decide who they're going to give the grants to when they look at it. So that's basically the explanation on that. Now, Martin, you have your hand up.
My colleague asked to contest your decision. I think we don't debate that. We go straight to a vote, and I would speak after the vote.
Thank you. All right, thanks. Now, so clerk, please call the vote.
So the vote is on the question, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So to clarify, if you vote yay, you sustain a chair's ruling and the motion is deemed inadmissible. If you vote nay, you overturn or you overrule the chair's decision and we continue on the debate on the motion. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
I vote yes.
Ms. Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Gainey.
Oui.
Ms. Latanzio.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Wall.
No.
Ms. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Gourde.
No.
Mr. Lawrence.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4.
Thank you very much. The motion, the chair's ruling is sustained. I see Mr. Noor Mohammed's hand up, but Mr. Champoux had the floor. Go ahead, Martin, and then Talib.
Là, si je comprends bien, Madame la Présidente, il y a
And so, if I understood, we have voted and we can now move on to something else because your decision was maintained. I would like to table a motion that I sent in the last few days, a motion that I will read. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, Catherine Tate, to appear for a period of 2 hours to answer questions concerning 1. The increase in funding to the public broadcaster of nearly $100 million per year. 2. The exemption granted by the government to CBC Radio-Canada to reduce its operating costs by 3.3%. 3. The payment of performance bonuses totaling nearly $15 million to CBC Radio-Canada executives. And that she explained the impact of these announcements on the announced elimination of 800 positions as well as the continuation of high-quality journalism in the regions of Quebec and Canada. Thank you.
The motion. Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. We now have a motion on the floor. So, Mr. Noor Mohammed, I'm going to have to entertain discussion on this motion. If you're speaking to the motion, your hand will be recognized. Anyone speaking to the motion or against the motion, please raise your hand. Ms. Thomas's hand was up. Then to the motion, is this it? Because that's what we're discussing. Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. Sure, Chair. I would offer I guess I would offer a friendly amendment to the motion. I would offer the following. The motion would read that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, Catherine Tate, and the Minister of Heritage to appear for a period of 2 hours each within 7 days of the adoption of this motion.
I might add that I don't think there is such a thing as a friendly motion unless you discussed it with the person before the meeting and they had agreed to entertain it. So you are putting forward an amendment to the motion. Can you just read the piece that's the amendment, Ms. Thomas?
I'm just trying to be kind.
I know
I'm
you are.
offering an amendment.
But
I read it.
We have to vote on it. Please entertain the amendment. You are adding the Minister of Canadian Heritage, and you're adding a timeline. Is that it?
That is correct. So I am adding the Minister of Heritage, that she would also come. So it would be Catherine Tate who would come for 2 hours, and the Minister of Heritage would also come for 2 hours, and that each of these witnesses would appear within 7 days of the adoption of this motion. I'm happy to provide copies of these changes to the members of this committee should they wish to have them.
All right. Now, so we have an amendment on the floor. Anyone speaking with regard to the amendment? Yes, Philip? and then Mata.
I believe I still have the floor.
Pardon?
I still have the floor.
Oh, sorry, I thought you'd finished.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that the clerk does have the wording of the motion, or the amendment. Yes, you're good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sure. So the amendment adds that the Minister of Heritage would come. The reason I feel this is important is because there's evidence to suggest that the Minister of Heritage actually knew that these bonuses had been given out. Which the problem is not the fact that the bonuses had been given out in October. The problem is that the CEO of the CBC, Catherine Tate, came to this committee and seemingly misled us to believe that that wasn't the case, that bonuses actually were being withheld until a further decision could be made in March. The Minister of Heritage ultimately is responsible for holding the CBC accountable, and so it seems appropriate that she would come to this committee and help us understand what happened here. So that is the reason for that. And then the second amendment that I have added here, the second part of the amendment that I have added here is that they would come within 7 days of the adoption of this motion. The reason why that is important is because sometimes these types of motions can get punted down the line and don't end up actually becoming a case for a study here at this committee for quite some time. And I do believe that, as my honourable colleague, Mr. Champoux, has outlined, this is of the essence. There are important things that need to be discussed. There is accountability that needs to be had. Questions need to be posed and answers need to be given. And so that would be the reason for the timeline there. If I may, my colleague, Mr. Champoux, didn't really speak to the essence of this motion. Perhaps he intends to do that in just a moment. I'll speak to it from my side of things, however. The overall motion calls for the CEO, Catherine Tate, to come to committee. And now I've added the Minister of Heritage and to answer with regard to bonuses that have come to light. Members of this committee will recall that just before Christmas, the president and CEO of CBC Radio Canada, Ms. Catherine Tate, announced that she would be cutting 800 positions. And she said she was doing this because of what she called chronic underfunding. It's important to remember that the CBC is given $1.3 billion annually, and that the Heritage Minister has actually increased that by another $100 million this spring. Now, when asked whether or not millions in bonuses for top executives would be out of the picture based on this hardship, she said it's too early to say. In other words, she was reserving the right to give bonuses to top executives, but she was scrapping 800 jobs. So at the end of January, we asked Ms. Tate to come to this committee where we had the opportunity to ask her questions with regards to the absurdity of this decision. During that time, she led us to believe that bonuses for 2023 had not yet been given and would be withheld until March. However, based on an ATIP and access to information, we now find out that actually she had given $15 million in bonuses even before she made the decision to scrap these 800 jobs, which means she put those bonuses ahead of those jobs. She put bonuses for executives ahead of 800 individuals who needed those positions. And so, given the fact that it seems she misled this committee, we have every right to bring her back and to ask her important questions. And the reason this is so important is because at the end of the day, the CBC is a public broadcaster paid for with public money, and it is our job at this committee to hold her accountable.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you very much. Just a quick, brief comment with your indulgence. Yeah. I'm going to go off topic I promised 20 seconds. I'm really kind of surprised and shocked that the previous was ruled inadmissible, just because racism and the study of racism and fighting racism seems squarely within Heritage Committee. And so regardless of the funding, I apologize, I'll just be 10 more seconds.
Philip, this is out of order. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with an amendment at the moment, and we want you to speak and focus on that.
I will. And when we get to this, and I think you actually end up in a place where you can't study it in either committee, because innovation industry isn't really normally the place you study racism and anti-racism efforts. So that being said, moving forward to the amendment, there's, of course, the responsibility. It's really a cornerstone of our democracy which is ministerial accountability. And that is absolutely critical. And we've seen, just through the testimony from Ms. Tate, that she appears unwilling or unable to make changes. And with respect to the bonuses of letting out 800 people, I think we really need the minister in this committee to change the action. I think the people of Canada, and particularly the province of Quebec, would want to see the minister of the federal government of Canada held accountable and responsible, because I'm very skeptical that Ms. Tate, of her own accord, will make decisions that affect the employment of the workers in particularly in Quebec in Radio Canada. And so I'm quite confident that the people of Quebec would want to have their representatives and the representatives of this parliament asking the minister of the federal government of Canada those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. You had your hand up, Martin, and then Talib.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank my colleague, Mr. Lawrence, for being concerned with what Quebecers would like. I can tell you what Quebecers want. They want the federal government to stay in their lane, in a way, especially with cuts to Radio-Canada that will impact the services. It is an injustice. This is management of CBC Radio-Canada. The management of Radio-Canada should not be something managed by the Government of Canada. The government could act in changing the mandate or renewing the mandate of the chair of CBC Radio-Canada. And that work has been started for a new president. If Ms. Thomas's changes are adopted, we could invite the minister, and it would be a good opportunity to ask questions on this. But currently, I would like to see Ms. Tate here at the table to ask her questions. When she came in December to justify the cuts of 800 positions and stated that it was due to a chronic underfunding, she explained that it was because the government would be implementing a 3.3% cut in its costs. And she stated that funding was insufficient, and so they needed to change their way of doing things through having ads, and then the government increased by $100 million CBC and Radio-Canada's funding, and they will be exempt from the 3.3%. So I don't see why they would continue, or they would move forward with the cuts of 800 jobs. This will have a significant impact on coverage in the regions in Canada. It will have a significant impact on culture and Francophone culture. The decisions made by Catherine Tate at the end of her mandate, because her mandate has been extended, so these decisions are an insult to Quebecers, in my view, to Quebecers and Canadians. And so she needs to explain why she would maintain these cuts of millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs that are essential to journalism and culture and Francophone culture in Quebec and Canada. I find Ms. Thomas's amendment interesting for the time frame. We can question the minister when she comes to talk about the supplementary budget. I think that to have a deadline for this motion is reasonable. Where I take issue is the 7 days. if we look at the current calendar, 7 days is by next Tuesday. And we only have one meeting left because the House isn't sitting next week. So 7 days means we would have the meeting with Ms. Tate this Thursday, and I don't think that we'll have enough time. She would probably not be available. Or we would have to organize a meeting when the House isn't sitting. I would be open to hear what my colleagues have to say. But perhaps it could be the first meeting after the 2 weeks of a parliamentary break. I don't have any issue with the second part of Ms. Thomas's amendment with a deadline for the ultimatum, if I can say it this way, or rather the deadline to have that meeting. I will stop there and see what my colleagues have to say.
New Mohammed? To the amendment? I'm afraid we can't hear you. While we're dealing with Mr. Nur Mohammed, Ms. Ashton, your hand is up. To the amendment?
Sure, but I thought Mr. Nur Mohammed's hand was up before mine.
Was, but we cannot hear him. So there's going to be a technical...
Can you not hear me?
Oh,
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Great.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead, Talib.
Excellent. I think there's a couple of things here. One is I think there are certainly challenges to the amendment. So I think we're right now, Madam Chair, we are speaking to the amendment, if I'm not mistaken. If we're speaking to the amendment,
Talib,
I think
excuse me a second.
Yeah.
Is everyone getting translation? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
No problem. I want to be very clear, we are focusing on the amendment right now, and then we're going to focus on the main motion thereafter. The idea that we are starting to think about the question of whether or not we want political interference into the world of the CBC and having any minister come to speak to what is happening at CBC, I think is hugely problematic. I think we have seen time and again the politicization of the CBC, the idea that, we hear from our conservative friends day and night that they want to defund the CBC, that the CBC is somehow, the government mouthpiece, at the same time as they say to people in Quebec that they want to keep funding Radio-Canada. I mean, I think the idea of bringing ministers into a conversation about the actions of CBC is hugely problematic unless we want to get into the business of having the political sphere tell the CBC what to do. And that is neither the mandate of the CBC nor the way in which any reasonable Canadian, any reasonable person would want the CBC to operate. So I think if we are to look at the amendment that Ms. Thomas wants to make on its merits, I think the real question we have to ask is, are we comfortable living in a world where politicians get to decide what's on the CBC, where the politicians get to decide what the CBC does, how the CBC works, so on and so forth? And I find that troubling as somebody, who believes fiercely in an independent public broadcaster and a public broadcaster that is able to tell the stories of Canadians from coast to coast to coast, whatever those stories are, whether they are for or against what the government is doing, whether they are, whether they support the government or not, and more often than not, they don't because they're good quality journalists. Their job is to ask difficult questions regardless of who is in power. I think when we start bringing ministers to the table to start asking questions about what the CBC is doing, I think we are going down a very, very slippery slope. And so I think that the amendment itself is fundamentally flawed in that regard. I think it is an opportunity that is being created to politicize, again, the CBC. It's an opportunity, again, for Conservatives to be able to talk about all of the reasons that the minister should defund the CBC, but in French say that they want to support Radio-Canada. And I think we need to be vigilant against that. I think it's an important thing for all of us to remind ourselves that political stripes of who is in power have changed in this country since Confederation. And the thing that has been the hallmark and the standard of this country is a public broadcaster that is reported without fear or favor on what the government has done or what the government has not done. So calling a minister to come and having the minister asked to justify actions of the CEO runs completely counter to the independence of the CBC. There is an independent board of the CBC that provides oversight. There is an executive team that is responsible for the function of CBC. And I think if we look at precedent of public broadcasters and the history of public broadcasting in this country, it is abundantly clear that we, regardless of who has been in the Prime Minister's office, have studiously avoided the construct of politicizing the CBC by holding ministers to account for what the CBC does. And when we start to do that, it does create, as I said before, a slippery slope. So I would encourage my colleagues, I don't think that this is something that is going to be heard by the Conservatives because they have whatever agenda that they have, but by my colleagues at the Bloc and the NDP to really ask ourselves, do we want to go down a road where minister appears and it's an opportunity for Conservatives to grandstand and simply browbeat the minister into asking why we are funding a public broadcaster? Now, knowing the minister, I am certain she would enjoy defending the CBC as most Canadians would. But I think the fact that we would want to make this a circus about political interference into the actions of the CBC is hugely problematic. So I would encourage all of us to raise our voices against this and to make sure that if there is an opportunity to keep driving home the point that we will not stand for the politicization of the CBC, that we will not stand for this type of action when it comes to making, creating the conversation where ministers themselves are the ones opining on the function of the CBC. I think that is a real problem. So I'm seeing a note, Madam Chair, from the interpreters. So I'm just going to pause for a second. Are they having some challenges hearing me? If the clerk might want to just check in, because it's got a note saying that they're able to translate, but the quality is not good. Is that true? Is there something you want me to do to adjust that?
It's the headset that doesn't seem to be selected, or sorry, the microphone.
Is that helping them? Is that better for them now that I've done that? They just redid the setting on the microphone.
Yes,
on the
thank
computer. You. Perfect. Okay, so I don't know how much of that they caught. If they need me to repeat anything, or if everything was if everything worked out okay, I'm happy to repeat what I was saying. But I think that really. I think everyone heard what I had to say. So if they did, then I will end my comments. But if you need me to repeat anything, if it was not heard properly, I'm happy to repeat it.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed, Ms. Ashton, and then Mr. Waugh. To the amendment.
Okay, so yes, in the spirit of expediency, I think what's most important here is to hear directly from the CEO of the CBC, Ms. Tate. I think we can ask questions to the minister when she comes on the estimates, but I would like to see a meeting focused on the CEO. So we won't be supporting the first part of the amendment, and like Monsieur Champoux, we are open to the second part in terms of timing. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton, and Mr. Waugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's, the statements that Ms. Tate made in December, knowing that the bonuses had already been, performance bonuses, had already been handed out in October. It's frustrating because if you listen to the meeting from December, Ms. Tate claims there were no performances at all. The bonuses were handed out in 2023. They normally do that in the early part of 2024. So right away we have found, Madam Chair, that Ms. Tate actually lied to the committee here when she came in December, which is really, as we all sit around as politicians, and she is head of a major corporation that is $1.4 billion and actually came to committee and misinformed everybody around the table is a real concern. I'd like the motion by Ms. Thomas for a couple of reasons. We need to reconvene next Tuesday, March 26th, 7 days from now, to hear from Catherine Tate. She has misled Canadians. She came in here saying, I need to drop 10% of the CBC staff, over 800. And then the Treasury Board, along with the Heritage Minister, agreed to a $96.1 million gift to the CBC, which brought them from $1.3 billion to $1.4 billion in the budget. So it's interesting, Ms. Tate has not talked about any more cuts, despite getting $96 million. She hasn't even really talked about, are we going to reinstate those that we had on the chopping block? So it's an interesting dilemma that we have in Heritage here, because I definitely think we need to hear, Madam Chair, from the head of the CBC, Catherine Tate. And I also think, because the Liberals at one time talked about a 3.3% decrease to the funding of CBC, and then all of a sudden turned around and gifted the CBC $96.1 million. And that's why I like the updated amendment by Ms. Thomas, because where did this money come from? When CBC went crying that we're going to cut 800 staff and that our bonuses, well, they're not coming, then we find out the first 10 months were paid out. So we still don't know November and December Christmas performance bonuses, which I think we're going to find out very shortly, either at the end of March or certainly the April. But it's astounding to me how you can reduce 800 employees at CBC and still give out nearly $15 million in performance bonuses. So I'm here for next Tuesday, March 26th. I like the amendment and I will support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there anyone else wanting to speak to this? Ms. Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, a couple things here. So I would just say with regards to the timeline, within 7 days, there's nothing precluding this committee from doing work during a break week. If we deem it important, we are welcome to do that. And of course, I understand that individuals are returning to their ridings, and so it's no problem. They can, of course, log in and be a part of that meeting virtually. So that has been accommodated. And then secondly, with regards to the Minister of Heritage, I recognize the arguments that have been brought forward by Mr. Nur Mohammed. I guess I would just highlight a couple of things.
Could I have a point of order, Madam Chair? The camera seems to be on you and not Ms. Thomas for some reason.
I'm sorry, I don't control the cameras.
I know,
but you
but
noted.
you're sitting there relaxing, listening to Ms. Thomas, and I think the viewers out there would like to hear what Ms. Thomas has to say and what she has to say, and also the video. We've got a number of cameras here. Perhaps we could employ those that got released from CBC to run these cameras if they're not properly run. I'll move that as a motion.
Thank you. Okay, now go ahead, Ms. Thomas. You have the floor and the camera.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you to my colleague Kevin for bringing attention to that. Sure. So just to say that once again, those words did come from me. I would just highlight for this committee that we have every ability to work during a break week. I realize that many of us are returning to our constituencies and we'll be working there. There's no problem. We can always log on and do this meeting by Zoom. And so those 7 days shouldn't be a problem. The second thing that I would say to the committee is just with regards to the Minister of Heritage coming. Look, there's a couple of things that need to be noted here. So Mr. Nur Mohammed mentioned that the minister is not responsible for answering for the CBC. In fact, actually, the minister is responsible for giving a contract to Miss Tate and for having renewed that contract to Miss Tate. Further, the minister is responsible for now doing the search and finding the next CEO or president of the CBC. And so the minister is actually directly involved. And so I'm not sure if Mr. Nur Mohammed is implying then that she is politically interfering in the CBC by making these job decisions or hiring decisions, or if Mr. Nur Mohammed is simply looking to mislead the members of this committee by saying that the mandate is different than what it actually is. Nevertheless, it is true that the minister has a lot to do with the CBC and the decisions that are made at the head of the organization. The second thing that I would raise is that it is the minister, in fact, who also made the decision with regards to the additional money that is going to the CBC. And so it is the minister that has determined that almost another $100 million will be given to the public broadcaster for this upcoming year. And we can expect to see that solidified in the budget, is my understanding. And so for these reasons, it does seem then that based on the motion Mr. Shampoo has brought forward, which have to do with both of these things that I just stated, that it would be appropriate for us to hear from the minister in addition to Ms. Tate. You'll note I am not taking away from the time that Ms. Tate is given. She will have 2 hours, and the Minister of Heritage will also have 2 hours. So it's simply an addition. There is nothing being deleted or taken away from the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Ms. Atancio?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think at this point it would be worth reading the motion out loud to have a better understanding in terms of what is the spirit of this motion. It says, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, Catherine Tate, and now the amendment says, and the Minister of Heritage to appear for a period of 2 hours each within 7 days of the adoption of this motion. That's also part of the amendment to answer the following questions. So questions concerning, 1, the increase in funding to the public broadcaster of nearly $100 million per year. 2, the exemption granted by the government to CBC Radio-Canada to reduce its operating costs by 3.3%. And 3, the payment of performance bonuses totaling nearly $15 million to CBC Radio-Canada executives. And that she explained, she referring to Ms. Tate, the impact of these announcements on the announced elimination of 800 positions, as well as the continuation of high-quality journalism in the regions of Quebec and Canada. Clearly,
we are dealing with the amendment only.
yes, no, I
Thank you.
understand.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, that's why I've highlighted the amendment part. So clearly, Madam Chair, the original motion dealt with the economic or managerial decisions that CBC undertakes. And I don't see the Minister of Heritage's role in the managerial decision or financial decisions being taken. Clearly the spirit, the original motion, the spirit of the motion is the expenses, the spending of sums of money, which has nothing to do really within the mandate or the role of the Minister of Heritage. And so therefore, I don't believe, I will be voting in favor of this in terms of including the Minister of Heritage. And with regards to the delay that my colleague has included in the motion, I agree with Mr. Shampoo. We can certainly come back from Constituency Week and deal with this motion unless there seems to be an urgency that it needs to absolutely be dealt with within the next 2 weeks.
Thank you, Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the previous minutes, I've understood that my Conservative colleagues will not remove inviting the minister. My issue is with the timeline, and I was wondering if we could invite the president or the CEO the first meeting after our break weeks. I don't mind if we sit during the break weeks. That is not a problem for me. However, I think that it should be something that is done in emergency situations. And I don't think that it'll be less of an issue when we come back in 3 weeks and we'll receive the same answers or non-answers from Ms. Tate. I believe that, yes, we could put a deadline for it to be done quickly, but I don't think that we necessarily need a meeting during our riding weeks. And Ms. Tate will probably tell us that she's not available anyway. And so we could reserve April 11th. I think that would be our first meeting after the break weeks. And we could propose a sub-amendment or reject the current amendment and propose another one. I think that we would be on the right path.
Thank you. I see no one. Oh, Nikki? Go ahead.
Oui, j'allais juste dire que je suis.
I was going to say that I agree with what Mr. Champoux has proposed to meet during the first meeting when we're back from the break weeks.
Thank you. So now I'm going to see no other hands up. I'm going to entertain a vote on the amendment. So, clerk, please.
Was there a sub-amendment?
The amendment by Miss Thomas is what we're dealing with.
Okay.
The ones in red.
Mr. Champoux was not a sub-amendment?
No, he hasn't made it. We can.
Okay.
No, he
Just
wasn't
clarify.
making a
Perfect. Thank you.
sub-amendment at the moment. He was just putting forward an idea.
So the vote is on the amendment of Ms. Thomas. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
No.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey.
No.
Ms. Latenzio.
No.
Mr. Fillmore.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Lawrence.
Oui.
Mr. Champoux.
Non.
Ms. Ashton.
No.
Yeas pour 4-4, nays contre 7-7.
Well, the amendment is defeated. And did I hear you saying you wanted to propose a sub-amendment, Martin?
Je pense pas que je puisse proposer un sous-amendement.
I don't think I can propose an amendment to my own motion.
All right, so now let's deal with the motion as it stands, the main motion that was put forward by Mr. Champoux, minus the amendments by Ms. Thomas. So, any debate on the main motion as unamended?
I'd like to propose an amendment. Et merci pour le
Thank you to my colleague for his great idea.
if we could put perhaps I'm just going to do this on the fly, and perhaps we can get the assistance with the clerk to iron this out. But that we have the meeting with Ms. Tate for no less than 2 hours on April the 11th, the first date of our return.
It's April 9th.
April 9th. Je m'excuse.
No less than 2 hours on April the 9th. All right, so that's a sub-amendment or an amendment, a new amendment. Martin? Did you put your hand up?
Absolument.
We're
Moi, Madame la-
speaking to this amendment proposed by Mr. Lawrence.
je pense que ça.
I believe that it reflects what we've just discussed. I think everyone agrees to have that meeting on the 9th of April. That gives us time. It's very reasonable. I don't even think we need to debate it. I think we all agree, and I think we can move directly to the vote. Madam Chair, I support this amendment.
Philip, to this amendment by Mr.
Yeah, thank you. I
Lawrence.
just wanted us to clarify that this is it is an invitation. Monsieur Champoux, I just want to make sure that we have clarity around this being an invitation or a summons to the CBC CEO. It's an invitation, correct?
It's invite.
Invitation. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
All right, thank you. And so anyone speaking, Anna?
I just have a question.
if she's not available that date, like say she's got vacation already planned or something, is it better not to leave it open to as soon as possible? Or I don't know. It just seems like if she can't do that date, then where are we? We resume this whole conversation or with a new date? Can we not just say as soon as she is able? Or
Yes, Mr. Nur Mohammed, you have posed a question. Nur Mohammed, you want to answer it? Are you speaking?
No, so I was actually, my question was going to be similar to Ms. Gainey's. We've also got the folks from Bell who have like disappeared into the wind. And it just seems like if the date doesn't work, then people are just never showing up. And so I'm wondering, while I think we have to deal with these things in some sense of urgency, like we have a situation with Bell where we still haven't been able to pin these guys down. So I'm wondering from a scheduling perspective, how this would all work.
The situation with Bell is that we had given them a date. They were not able to make that, and I mentioned that at one of the last meetings that we had, and everyone agreed that you can't make people come if they cannot. But the clerk has been negotiating a time for them to appear. Did you want to speak to them, clerk?
So Bell has responded that the next availability of the CEO to appear is Tuesday, May 28th.
Now, the committee may want to deal with that because it was a summons for Bell, wasn't it? It wasn't a summons, it was an invite. The committee will want to deal, but right now we are actually dealing with Mr. Lawrence's amendment. Yes, Philip.
I think it's more than reasonable, given we're giving the CEO 2 weeks, 3 weeks of notice for her to be there. But I would also be amenable to changing it to any time before April 9th or before, if you want to give the clerk additional time. And the Conservatives are more than happy to meet during the break week, or if that better suits the CEO's schedule.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Martin? You want to discuss the amendment by Philip?
Moi, j'ai pas de problème.
I don't have any issue with Mr. Lawrence's proposal. I would have trusted the goodwill of Miss Tate, who stated that we wouldn't have to summon her, that we could simply invite her and she would be here. And she would accept our invitation. And so we can invite her to come on April 9th or at her earliest availability if she is abroad or elsewhere, as was the case when she was in Australia in the fall. So we could state April 9th or at the earliest convenience after that.
So you are adding a sub-amendment to this at the earliest, Philip? And then Kevin and then Nikki.
Do I have the floor, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I wouldn't want to just leave it open to as early as convenience, because that convenience can be defined in different ways. I think anytime up to April 9th, including April 9th, would be good. But I'm okay with just saying April 9th. It's simple. And let's just go ahead and get her there. And if there is an issue, maybe the clerk could inform us as to what would happen if Miss Tate said she was unavailable there.
Go ahead. I mean, if she said she's unavailable, we cannot take her and bring her in a stretcher or something. I mean, I don't know, but whatever. Go ahead, Georgia.
So if she is unavailable, I would inform the committee and they can decide whether they would like to be open to a different date or to go the route of the summons.
Let us know if she says she's unavailable and we can make that decision, okay? All right. So now I go to Mr. Waugh and then Ms. Ashton.
No, in fact, Madam Chair, we might even get a bonus here when she comes April 9th, as the head of CBC might tell the committee that in November and December, added to the 14.9 bonuses that she has already paid out in 2023, April 9th might be a good day for us, where she's going to tell us that, oh, well, you know what, November and December, I was Santa Claus and we gave out more bonuses. So April 9th might be the nice date.
Thank you. Nikki?
Okay. I just want to be clear on the timing, that the language we're using won't refer to the break weeks. I agree with the sentiment that this perhaps isn't as urgent as other matters that have to be dealt with during the break weeks. And as somebody who represents one of the largest ridings in the country, break weeks are critical to be able to hitting the road. And a lot of the communities I represent don't have quality internet. So it's not always easy to drop everything and connect to committee during times where we've already booked travel.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. I'm going to reiterate, there is only one simple amendment, and that is that for no less than 2 hours on April the 9th. That's the amendment. It's clear, simple, it doesn't mention break weeks. Everyone is discussing and throwing in break week, but the amendment is pretty simple. Okay, Mr. Nur Mohammed? You're speaking to the amendment?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, we've heard in the context of this amendment, Mr. Waugh, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for, make light of collective agreements and sort of payments made under collective agreements. We've also heard him mock CBC employees who have lost their jobs and the competence of House of Commons
Point of
employees
order.
today. So I'm not sure that's,
Point of order.
that's the tone we'd like
Mr.
to
Nur
set.
Mohammed, that is not speaking to the amendment.
Thank you.
It's
No,
out
but
of
it
your
is, Madam Chair, if I could be allowed to
intervention. It's
finish
not
my
with
point.
regard to the amendment, but you are, in fact, not speaking to the amendment. If you wish to speak to the amendment, go ahead. You have the floor.
But my point is that if the date that we are talking about is because somehow there's going to be some magical bonuses issued, I mean, I think the context of this is important. If we are asking someone to appear, setting these dates has clearly not worked. And so what I would like us to do is, if the intention of the committee is to call somebody, to make sure that we get the person, not just to show up, not just say, here are the dates we're going to give you, and then, oh, it doesn't work, and then we move on to the next thing. And I have said this before, and I'll say it again, setting a date has clearly not delivered us the folks from Bell, and that was a summons. So if we're going to do this, we have to be able to give people enough time to show up. We have to do the work, and the clerk is doing her work to make sure people can show up. But this is an important consideration.
Actually, Bell was not a summons. It was an invite.
It was
not
an invite.
a summons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on this change or this amendment. Please, those, clerk.
The vote is on the amendment of Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Trying to unmute myself. I am going to vote no on the amendment, Madam Chair.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey.
No.
Ms. Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Fillmore.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton. Oh, sorry, your microphone is lifted, so I could not hear that.
Can you use your thumb if your microphone isn't working? You are in agreement, okay? She's a yes vote.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The amendment passed, so that the motion now under consideration is an amended motion that has the words Ms. Tate for no less, after Ms. Tate added for no less than 2 hours on April the 9th. So with seeing no hands up, let us vote on the motion as amended. Clerk?
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
I'm going to vote no.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey.
No.
Ms. Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Fillmore.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Lawrence.
Oui.
Monsieur Champoux.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton.
We can't hear you again. Thumb, please, Miss Ashton.
I'm unmuting. Oh,
You're muted?
Right.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The motion is, as amended, is passed. Thank you very much. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to move a motion for consideration for the committee today. The motion reads as follows. Given that the Liberal government's carbon tax has had a detrimental impact on the cultural, civic, and economic life of Canadians, making life increasingly unaffordable and severely limiting their ability to support and enjoy the arts and culture sector, the committee report to the House its recommendation that the government should immediately cancel the carbon tax. Madam Chair, I'm happy to pause and give a moment for the motion to be distributed, although it has been on notice since January 26th, and then I would like to resume.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Who's
I would
point
like
of
to,
order?
if you.
Sorry,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Nur Mohammed, please use your hand, then I can notice you.
I did.
Okay.
I did, but nobody called on me, so you waved frantically.
All right.
Madam Chair, I would like you to rule on the admissibility of this motion to this specific committee, please, Madam Chair, because I'm fairly certain we don't deal with carbon pricing in this committee.
Then I would ask that we suspend for a few moments while I look at the admissibility or inadmissibility of this motion. Mr. Lawrence?
I believe it's permissible.
Yes.
And so sorry, Ms. Thomas, if I could just steal this from you. It says specifically has a detrimental impact on cultural, civic, and economic life of Canada. And I believe that the culture is directly within the 4 squares of the heritage. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Now, excuse me, so I'm going to suspend just for a couple of... Ms. Ashton and Mr. New Mohammed. Now, we have suspended so that I discussed with the clerk and the analysts, and I'm going to rule this motion admissible because it clearly speaks to the mandate of heritage. And I have the mandate written here because the mandate is to deal with the economic and cultural life of Canadians and to make it possible for them to experience arts and culture in the country. And the motion speaks clearly that people can't experience it. So I'm going to rule it admissible, and I'm going to entertain debate on the motion. Ms. Thomas, you wanted to say something about it?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think just as reference for the committee, I would just highlight exactly what you've referred to here, Chair, and that is that under the Canadian Heritage Mandate posted on the government's website, it says the Department of Canadian Heritage and its portfolio organizations play a vital role in the cultural, civic, and economic life of Canadians. So that line, which then appears in our motion, is used by the government itself to describe the mandate of heritage. And so it is appropriate that we would discuss then to what effect the carbon tax, or what effect the carbon tax is having on those things in Canadian life. I'm not sure about other members at this table, but I have had the chance to meet with the head of Theatre Calgary. I have met with various theatre organizations and other entertainment organizations in Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal, and I have heard firsthand from them the difficulty that they are having with regard to ticket sales. And they would point to the feedback that they're getting from their patrons as to why they are not frequenting as much. And the number one reason would be that life is unaffordable. That at the end of the day, folks are left with less and less disposable income. And because of that, they are making the decision to cut things like live theater from their weekly or monthly or even maybe, once or twice a year activity that they would engage in. As a result, then, these organizations or companies are having a really difficult time making ends meet. Those that I have had the opportunity to meet with, of course, are looking for greater support. They're looking to the government for that. But in fact, the government wouldn't be asked for that if Canadians could simply afford to go and participate in these activities that they would wish to. If they could go to dance, if they could go to music festivals, if they could go to live theater, if they had the money in their pockets to be able to afford that, then these companies or organizations would not be left in a place where they are having to beg for a handout. They do not wish to be in that position. They wish instead to be upheld, maintained, supported by individuals, by Canadians. Mainly, that's the way they want to be supported because it means that they have an audience, which is ultimately their goal. It means that there are people in the theater that are watching these shows, that are excited about these shows, that are supporting these shows. It means that arts and culture are alive and well and being supported in this country. That is the mandate of this committee. The mandate of this committee is to make sure that the cultural, civic, and economic life of Canadians is upheld, that it is supported. And one of the big ways that the government can do that is by scrapping the carbon tax and making sure that Canadians are not having to pay this punitive amount of money, which is attached to everything from home heating to gas to groceries. And this government has now scheduled to increase that carbon tax by 23% in just a few weeks on April 1st. And so you can imagine that when the government increases the carbon tax yet again, the impact that this will have on Canadians and robbing them yet again of disposable income and the ability to afford the arts. So I believe it is incumbent upon this committee then to take those things into account,
to stand up for arts and culture in this country, and to therefore recommend to the House that the carbon tax should be immediately cancelled so that Canadians are therefore left with more money to be able to pay for the things that they wish to spend money on, such as the arts. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Mr. Nur Mohammed, did you put your hand down? Or take your hand down?
Madam Chair, I did put my hand down.
You're
because I
not
think
ready to speak, but I'm wondering because your hand has gone down.
I did put my hand down on this particular motion because
All
I'm
right.
assuming we'll vote on
Okay,
it
thank you.
tomorrow.
So, Mr. Waugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with this motion for a number of reasons. I wake up very early in the morning and I read all newspapers in this country, and I can tell you it's a disaster that is happening before our eyes. In London, the Home Country Festival has been cancelled. Taste of Saskatchewan cancelled. Hawk Docks, Toronto Fringe Festival, major cutbacks. Just for Laughs, eliminated in Montreal and Toronto. Taste of Danforth, cancelled this year. Toronto Arts and Food Festivals, cancelled this year. I can go on and on and on. I'm very disturbed of what's going on in the culture. I think this is worse, believe it or not, than we saw in COVID. Many of these organizations were looking forward to relief out of COVID, but this is worse now. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Nobody has the capability now of going to these events. Their attendance has been well down in 2023 across the board, from Atlantic provinces right, Madam Chair, to your province in BC. They are not drawing the interest they once did, and I believe it is because of the carbon tax, where people in this country don't have the disposable income to really give the arts and culture in this country the boost financially that they need. And, you know, many of these in the last 3 months alone of 2023-24 have had to make major announcements. In January, February, and this month, March, they're usually booking people at this time to perform in June, July, and August. They've decided just to close up shops. I've mentioned a few here, but there's many more coast to coast that just can't afford it anymore, and they're very, very disappointed because, as you know, in the arts and the community, these people don't make a lot of money. And they go from city to city just to trying to eke out a living, make a name for themselves. But I can tell you 2024 will be disastrous in the arts and communities in our country because of the carbon tax. They just don't have the disposable income that they once had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. I go to Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you very much.
And then Ms. Ashton and Martin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My colleagues did comment, I think, quite eloquently and profoundly with respect to the arts. My background's more on the finance side, and so I'd just like to take a moment, if I could, and just talk specifically about the economic impact of the carbon tax. So across the different provinces, whether it be Ontario, where net of rebate, Ontario you lose about $600, and Alberta you lose about $1,000. Just imagine if you took that net amount and you put that towards some type of live theater. That $600 would get you, I believe, a season's pass for every production at the Capitol Theatre in my riding of Port Hope, and I'm sure they would greatly appreciate it if all 100,000 residents of Northumberland, Peterborough South were willing to spend were given that $600 back and spent that at the live theater, which is amazing, in Port Hope at the Capitol Theatre. When we look at it, of course, there's the financial impact, which the PBO put out, and like I said, if you're in Alberta, it's $1,000. If you're in Ontario, my province, it's $600, and really across the province for all where the backstop applies. The other part of it is it has a significant impact on inflation as well. This has been somewhat underreported or even misreported, I might say, because the Governor of the Bank of Canada, in response to questioning to the Finance Committee, said that actually 0.6% of inflation is directly resulted of the carbon tax, and the upcoming increase is responsible for 0.015%, which equates to about 26 or 27% of total inflation, meaning we could eliminate nearly 30% of inflation tomorrow if we just scrap the tax, which would be a tremendous benefit. We're all hearing it, and whether you're Liberal, NDP, or Bloc Québécois, I'll tell you, the next 2 weeks, I guarantee the thing that all of us will hear the most about is the affordability crisis. And as my great staffer Emma said, as we were discussing this, if in fact you are struggling just to have enough to eat, and there are 2 million Canadians using food banks right now. The ability to afford arts and entertainment and is very, very difficult, and that really did digress just shortly here, and I'll wrap up soon. But I mean, you need food to live. It's the how of living, but you need arts and entertainment to give you that why. And so when people are deprived of that because of the affordability crisis, even those that are able to make it through, a lot of the why is taken away when you don't get to see the beauty of art and of live theater and amazing performances that are from coast to coast to coast. And so everything that we can do to get this economy back on track, not just to get people no longer reliant on the food bank, but so that they can afford to see the wonderful performances and afford that the reason why we go through every day, I think would be absolutely amazing. So I will be fully supporting this, and I would encourage all my colleagues, and I'm hoping we can get unanimous consent, or unanimous support for it. Thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair, if I might. Point of order.
Yes.
Madam Chair, we're now at 30 minutes left in the meeting. We have folks that were there to do the sensitivity training. If we're not going to be able to do that training, can we at least ask them? Maybe we can let them leave so that we can continue whatever is happening here, because it seems unfair to them.
Yes, it would seem to me that we're going to be continuing this debate. So I think we can ask them to come another time, but we do need to listen to them. This is so important. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, well, first off, this is the second committee that I'm on where we're dealing with this motion, and while I appreciate that affordability is a crisis in our country, it's clear people are struggling here at home and across the country. I think we're also seeing some serious theatrics from the Conservatives in trying to jam these motions in every single committee. I also, as somebody who's been a member of Parliament for a while and was here during the dark days of Stephen Harper when it came to the arts community, I think it's pretty rich to hear Conservatives go to the wall for the arts. And when they were in power, that we saw some of the deepest cuts to arts and culture. Also comments that the arts are suffering more than during COVID. I know Conservatives like to downplay the pandemic.
Nikki, excuse me. Are you not getting translation?
Il arrive à certains moments, Madame la Présidente, où le micro de Madame Ashton semble se déplacer ou être obstrué.
It seems that sometimes the sound, Miss Ashton's sound is fluctuating.
So please try and speak into the microphone and slower, a little slower.
Okay, maybe slower. Yes, I'm using all the house equipment. So, but all to say that. We in the NDP have been clear. Affordability is a crisis. We'd love for the Conservatives to join us in calling on fair taxation, especially of the rich and powerful in our country who are getting off the hook without paying their fair share of taxes, money that could be reinvested in our social safety net and reinvested in ways that could support Canadians who are struggling right now. This motion does not do that, and certainly we won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Martin.
Je trouve ça intéressant, Madame la...
I find it interesting, Madam Chair, to hear my Conservative colleagues defending the arts and culture sector. It's refreshing. At Heritage, we examine communication, culture, things like that, and in culture there is entertainment. And I find that my Conservative colleagues are entertaining and creative in how they always bring the carbon tax to the table.
Ceci étant dit,
That said, Ms. Thomas earlier talked about people in culture that she had the opportunity to talk with. It's a very concerning issue throughout Canada and Quebec. The coming months don't seem rather probably won't be fruitful for that sector. We mentioned the Just for Laughs festival that won't be occurring this summer. It's extremely concerning to see such giants in Quebec and in Canada stopping their activities. I think that the situation in Quebec and Montreal, where Ms. Thomas stated having discussions with people, I think that the situation is the same as in other big cities. The carbon tax does not apply in Quebec. And so I'd be curious to know what the difference is between the financial situation of cultural industries in other main cities in Canada compared to Montreal, so we can see what the real impact of the carbon tax is on the cultural sector, because it doesn't apply in Quebec, so we can't say that it has an impact on culture in Quebec. So we'd be able to see what the impact is, if any, of the carbon tax, because, again, it doesn't apply in Quebec. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And now I go to Ms. Thomas again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I can appreciate a number of the comments being made around this table, and in particular my colleague, Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Waugh. I believe both of them made really good points with regards to the carbon tax and the impact that it's having on Canadians. Mr. Waugh, listed off, I think, almost a dozen festivals and celebrations that are being cancelled or have been cancelled because there just isn't the money available. And if we were to tap into that further, we would see that the reason that money isn't available is because there are not individuals showing up at these things. There's a lack of demand, not a lack of want, a lack of demand. To clarify then, Canadians want these things. They want to engage in cultural activities. To Mr. Champoux' point, Canadians want to celebrate their culture, their tradition, their way of life, whatever that might be. There's a whole host within that. But when they don't have the income to be able to participate in those activities, then it results in a lack of demand. So again, the want is significant, but the demand is not. And so then as a result, then we're seeing these things be canceled. To Mr. Lawrence's point, the carbon tax has a significant impact on the disposable income of a home and people's ability to be able to afford activities within the realm of arts and culture. And so instead of being able to engage in these activities, which tend to be a lot of fun, and as Mr. Lawrence said, provide the why to life. Instead, folks are too many of them are stressed out and concerned about affordability issues. We literally have millions of people in this country lining up at food banks every single month. We're told that we can expect another million to be added to that lineup in this coming year, 2024, in the months ahead of us. And the reason being is because Canadians are struggling to be able to pay their rent, to be able to put fuel in their vehicles, to be able to put food on their tables, and to be able to pay for other activities such as being able to put their children in sports or the arts. This is a problem. This is a really big problem. And so it is appropriate for this committee then to take that under consideration and to care about Canadians in this way, which is the reason for the motion that we've moved here today.
Thank you. Mr. Gourd.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to lend my voice to Ms. Thomas to explain the collateral damage of the carbon tax in the arts industry. Mr. Champoux understands that Quebec made a different choice, but it was because of pressure from the federal government, knowing that the Liberal government was going to be implementing a tax. Quebec chose a different path, but perhaps it would have been different had there not been as much pressure, knowing that there was going to be a carbon tax. Point of order, Madam Chair? Madam Chair?
Rappel au règlement sur...
Point of order. Perhaps I just want to make sure that we hear the facts. The carbon exchange that was referred to, well, it was Mr. Harper who was in power, so there wasn't a lot of pressure from the Liberals at that time. No, this is a clarification, and it's done. Thank you.
I was making a point. All right, should we continue? Is there any further speakers? Mr. Good, you finished?
Est-ce que je
All
peux
right.
continuer, Madame la Présidente?
Yes, thank you.
May I continue? That said, Madam Chair, I had stated that this happened about 10 years ago, but there were already talks of a carbon exchange. Anyway, the carbon tax in the provinces and the carbon exchange are about the same. However, with the increase coming in April and other increases between now and 2030, the carbon tax will exceed the carbon exchange. And once it goes above the carbon exchange, it will apply to Quebec at the same rate as the other provinces. And so Quebec will be paying as much as the other provinces, either through a carbon tax, a carbon exchange, or a mix of both. Collateral damage will have an impact on all sectors. And arts and culture, sales of tickets. Quebec is a big province, and when we see a show in the regions, one needs to take their car and do the math, see how much gas is going to cost, and see how much tickets will cost. And there are fees as well for groups or people who go on tour. And so, of course, this is all going to negatively impact culture. And so I believe that this motion is very important. It would allow to reduce the cost of living and allow for there to be more money in Canadians' pockets, which will allow them to make choices. And a cultural choice is unavoidable because Quebecers love going to see a show. They invest when they have the means to do so. And so you'll understand, Madam Chair, the impact of the carbon tax. Even if it doesn't currently apply to Quebec, it will in the future after April 1st and the other dates, because the carbon exchange will increase to $171 per ton. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go to Mr. Waugh again. Kevin?
Yeah, I'll just thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out right now the Winnipeg Jets, every day that they play, they're near the top of the NHL. Their owners have actually talked about an issue in Winnipeg because they're not selling out, and yet the hockey club today would have a pretty good chance of going a long way in the NHL playoffs. This is what's happening in this country. When you look at teams like Winnipeg, when you look at teams like Ottawa, although Ottawa's had a tougher year, but I think the cost of living has hit Canadians coast to coast. When I look at the Winnipeg Jets situation, they've already lost a hockey club years ago at Arizona. Now the owner came forward here about 2 months ago, not saying they're going to move, but saying he's concerned with the 12,000 instead of 15 to 16,000 that they should be getting. And then everyone in the Winnipeg area kind of got their back up, if you don't mind me saying, Madam Chair, because they love the Jets, but they just can't afford the tickets. And of course, they'll probably go up in the playoffs, and it'll be interesting because everybody from the president of the NHL, Gary Bettman, the commissioner, is, in fact, Bettman arrived in Winnipeg because he too is concerned about the situation. But the arts, culture, and sports in this country is hurting. When you got the Winnipeg Jets fighting for first overall in the NHL, having attendance problems only because citizens from Manitoba and Saskatchewan are struggling with the carbon tax to support a hockey club that certainly should be supported this year. My last comment is Wolseley, Saskatchewan. They're up one of 4 communities in Canada looking to improve their rink. And every year, TSN, along with Kraft Hockey, donate a sizable amount of money, up to $100,000, to improve their rink. But the story out of Wolseley this week wasn't that they're going to kick off the competition on March 29th. The story out of Wolseley, with about 800 people, about an hour or so out of Regina, is that they're out of food for the food bank. They have over 30 people that have gone to the food bank in the last week, and they said, sorry, we have no more food. This is in a province of Saskatchewan, Madam Chair, that actually feeds not only this country, but the world. So look what's happened. My community of Saskatoon, 23,000 a month go to the Saskatoon Food Bank and Learning. And then we get Wolseley, which I wanted to talk about because we're all excited. Saskatchewan has never won the $100,000 from Kraft Hockey. They have a chance to win it here. But everyone now has shifted. We're not going to worry about the rink, which is the community that everybody knows, rural Canada, the rink.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Nur Mohammed.
You had noted earlier that when I had made comments, they were not relevant to the motion. I'm just curious how this has to do with arts and culture funding and the carbon tax in Canada. And I'm not sure that talking about hockey and the NHL and privately funded hockey teams that, like the Ottawa Senators, who have other reasons that people aren't going to their games, are part of the conversation about arts and culture in Canada, which we've heard our colleagues so emphatically seek to defend. And I'm certain that when there are chances to refund the arts, that they will be actively supporting it. But for now, I'm not sure how this relates, Madam Chair. If you could help us with that, please.
I allowed Mr. Ward to do this because, of course, sports is part of heritage. But I think I take your point about the private sector making a lot of money in NHL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Mr. Ward was trying to press a point about whatever his point is that he's making with regard to this.
Madam Chair, I'll just wrap up. I feel for Wolseley because Canadians in the next 2 weeks will be asked to vote for a community that gets a $100,000 gift from Kraft to do the hockey rink renovations. Some don't have ice. Some want an ice plant. Wolseley needs, as others in this country, an upgrade. So that story now that I talked about Wolseley is all about the food bank and the empty shelves and the cost of living. And that's why I kind of tied it in with the Winnipeg Jets as a sports team. But in Wolseley, Saskatchewan, 850 population, they're struggling not only for the rink, but the food bank, which, is under siege right now with no food on their shelves, under the greatest need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seeing no other interveners, Mr. Lawrence.
I'm sorry, Mr. Waugh's comments on hockey. It was too irresistible for me not to comment on it. I'll be very quick though, so we can move to a vote and move on. I cheer for a team. I cheer for multiple teams. I of course cheer for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I also cheer for I also cheer for the Buffalo Sabres. And the Buffalo Sabres live, of course, they operate out of a community in Buffalo, which is a population of 276,000. Winnipeg has a population of 795,000. The Buffalo Sabres have been terrible. They haven't made the playoffs since Stephen Harper was prime minister, to give you an idea of how bad they've been. They drew in 2022, 2023, on average 15,000. Compare that to the Jets, to 12,000. The Jets have been a much better team. And I think it's reflective of the economic differences. U.S. per capita growth has been...
Okay.
I'll be 2 more seconds.
I'm going to say this is out of order now. We're just
Okay,
getting into debates
I'm gonna
on
just give me
hockey
1 second to
teams.
wrap it back.
Okay,
Okay,
all right.
okay, because the per capita income in the United States has grown by over 50% in the last 10 years, and Canada's grown by 4%. And it's that, and one of the economic differences in the Canada and the U.S. is a carbon tax. And so if we want to fund sports, if we want to fund arts, we want to fund the performing arts, which I think, as I said, are the why. They're critical to Canadian culture, their very existence. They're the fabric of our country. We need to axe the tax.
Thank you. Okay, Miss Ashton. And then Mr. Shampoo. And then I think we're becoming very circular in this debate right now. Miss Ashton.
I certainly support moving quickly to a vote, but I also just want to be clear here. First of all, as the only Manitoban in this committee that has followed this story out of the Jets, I think it's really important that we be clear that the Jets nowhere in their announcement talked about the carbon tax. Right. So, I mean, just to bring that into this committee is just bizarre. I mean, if we want to talk about hockey, let's talk about hockey. But let's be truthful. When the Winnipeg Jets talked about a drop in sales, they didn't talk about the carbon tax specifically. Also, the Jets are partially owned by one of the richest men in Canada. So we're not actually, being factual in our discussion here. And I'm certainly keen to move on to the vote so that we can get this over with.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Mr. Shampoo.
Madame la Présidente, je vais être très, très bref parce que...
I'll be very brief because we started talking about hockey. I know a city where there wouldn't be any issues filling the arena. We want the return of the Nordics in Quebec. Thank you.
The Canucks. Okay, now, all right, so I think seeing no other discussion, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the vote, please.
So the vote is on the motion of Ms. Thomas. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
No.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Madame Guiney.
No.
Ms. Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Fillmore.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes. Go.
Monsieur Shampoo.
Non.
Ms. Ashton.
No.
Yeas pour 4, 4. Nays contre 7, 7.
The motion is defeated. Thank you. And now we have asked the people who are going to talk to us a little bit about trauma-informed practices to leave. So, Ms. Thomas, Mr. Noor Mohammed, sorry, his hand was up first. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you rightly point out, today was supposed to be a day where we heard from folks that were going to help us understand how to deal with victims, to have trauma-informed conversations, and instead we've entertained frivolous motion on the carbon tax. Given that we've wasted all their time and they're now gone, from today, I'd like to move that we adjourn this meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to call the vote on adjournment. Anybody opposed to adjourning? Ms. Thomas?
I'm opposed. We still have 10 more minutes, and we don't. We have 10 more minutes.
It's not debatable, Ms. Thomas. Pardon? Yeah. Yes, so we're going to move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you. There's just one person. Well, let's call a vote. Those in favor of adjourning and etc. Ms.
I would ask for a roll call vote.
Clerk, Geneviève.
The vote is on the motion to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yes.
Ms. Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Gainey.
Yes.
Ms. Latanzio,
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore,
Yes.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Ms. Thomas,
No.
Monsieur Gourde,
No.
No.
Mr. Lawrence,
No.
Monsieur Champoux,
Non.
Miss Ashton.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, 6 nays contre 5, 5.
Motion to adjourn has passed. Yes? Meeting is adjourned.